Strangely, my obsession for perch actually originated from targeting another species, and they're largemouth and smallmouth bass. As a boy, my family and I used to go on holiday to America. Florida especially is one of my favourite places in the whole world, and they've got some fantastic fishing out there, and we used to have some great times fishing for bass and a lot of other species too. I think the reason why I love perch so much is because they're the UK's equivalent of bass, even Europe's equivalent of bass, arguably. I know they're not the biggest predatory species we have in the UK, but there's something about a big perch that looks seriously impressive. I mean, even a 2-pounder's a big fish, but once you catch a fish over 3, or if you're lucky to get one over 4 pound, is an amazing sight. A lot of my fishing in the UK is targeting perch on lures and flies, and I've been lucky enough to catch 15 over 4 pound now, but even a 2 or 3 pounder still excites me. They're still fantastic fish. I think probably the most exciting element for me is the take. So when a big perch takes your lure, it's almost like a really heavy slam, and sometimes, especially when you're fishing like at long distance and you get that kind of take, you just know it's a big perch. It's those aggressive takes that makes me want to keep fishing for them and keep learning more about them too. I mean, we're fishing in pretty extreme conditions at the moment. When we left the car this morning it was -4, but I'm still fishing, I'm still after them. I've fished in a lot of different places for perch. I've even caught yellow perch in Canada as well, but one of my favourite venues to target perch on is Grafham Water in Cambridgeshire. I've fished it since an early age, and my dad also fished it as a boy as well. So I first started trout fishing it when I was around about 8 or 9 years old. And after kind of learning the ropes of what it's like to be out on a boat on a big expanse of water like this, my dad introduced me to fishing for other species and kind of mixing it up a little bit, so targeting pike, perch and zander as well. And ever since then, I've just found them really fascinating fish to target, all 3 species, but particularly perch. What I like about this place is that you've always got the chance of hooking into something special. Your next bite could be a perch of 8 ounces, it could be a 4 pounder. Grafham's not the easiest of venues, that's for sure, and it can be really hard at times, but I keep coming back because I know there's some very special fish in here. As I said earlier on, you've always got the chance of hooking into something very special. I think because I've kind of like grown up fishing Grafham, I think that's why it's kind of a special place to me. I mean, I like fishing all the reservoirs and I like exploring new venues too, but there is something about Grafham that makes me want to keep going back. As I said earlier, many of the reservoirs in the Midlands are not easy places to fish, particularly Grafham, but it is one of those places where you could catch the fish of a lifetime, and very recently I caught one of my best perch from Grafham, which was a very special fish, and that was 4 pound exactly. Since the start of the new year, my dad and I had a couple of trips to Grafham targeting perch and zander, and we caught some really nice fish. Not many, but with an average size of over 3 pound, it made us just want to keep coming back. I then had a trip back with a colleague of mine from Farlow's, where I work as a sales advisor, and unfortunately we had a really windy day that wasn't actually forecast. I only caught one perch. It was over 3 pound though, it was a really nice fish, but we had a couple of other bites and there were quite a few fish in a particular area that we'd come across, so I was really keen to get back and give it another go. The next trip I had back to Grafham was with my dad again, and this time the conditions were looking a lot more favourable. So we got up early, got on the road at 6:45. It normally takes us about 50 minutes or so to get to Grafham, but recently the traffic's been getting a lot worse and we've been having to get up earlier and earlier to make sure that we arrive on time. Thankfully we did arrive on time and we got set up, and Grafham was really low during that period. The reservoir had been drained. It was actually sort of 12 to 14 foot lower than it normally is, and the reason for that was because they'd been doing maintenance works somewhere and it was taking a long time for the water level to rise back up to its normal level. Anyway, we were fishing nice and early and we planned to target zander in the morning, so we headed off to an area where we know there are some big zander and where we've caught big zander from in the past. And we'd seen quite a few arcs in that area on the sonar the trip before, and we were pretty sure that they were big zander, so we decided to head there first and give it a go. We fished that for a couple of hours, but nothing was really happening. I wasn't even seeing much on the finder, to be honest. Certainly not the number of fish that we'd seen on the trip before. So after doing a few drifts with no bites at all, we decided to change location and head to another area of the reservoir. Normally, as we're driving from one area to the other, one of us is always looking at the fish finder and keeping an eye out for any bait fish shoals or groups of big fish or arcs. And I actually had all 4 settings running, so the GPS, sonar, down scan and side scan, searching for fish. Anyway, about halfway between where we'd left and where we were aiming for, I looked at the side scan and we came across a very big group of fish. And normally when you're looking at the side scan and the down scan, you can tell the size of the fish. So if they're tiny little, almost like pinprick sized shapes, they're probably bait fish, but these were much bigger and it was too good to miss. I wasn't even quite sure what species they were at first, to be honest, because looking at the finder, we were actually in about 32 foot of water, but the fish were not all on the bottom, so there were fish that were as high as 15 foot off the bottom. So I wasn't quite sure whether it could be trout or even bream, because there are some huge shoals of bream in Grafham. So we set up a quick experimental drift to see whether they might be perch or zander, and first cast I had a hit, struck, and I was in. There was a lot of heavy head shaking, so I'm sure it was a perch, but unfortunately it came off. So I cast back out again, let the jig fall to the bottom, hopped it a couple of times and bang, I had another hit again. And this fish we did manage to net, and it was a perch and it was 2.15, so a really nice fish to start the day. After a couple of quick pictures and releasing that fish, we'd actually drifted over them. So it was time to make another drift, and this time, obviously because we knew there was a good shoal of fish there, we decided to start the drift a little bit further back to give us a bit more time to settle down, or for the boat to settle, and so we could stay on the fish a little bit longer. So we set up a drift heading into shallower water, and a couple of casts in, I hooked into another fish. Now this one felt quite a lot heavier than the last perch I'd just caught. Again, there was a lot of heavy head shaking going on, and I actually remember saying to Dad that this one feels quite a bit bigger than the last one. I really didn't want this fish to come off because I was curious to see how much bigger it could be than the last one I'd just caught, and it actually came up to the boat very quickly, and when it did, I knew it was a very special fish. You know what it's like when you think you've hooked into a big fish, the adrenaline starts pumping, your heart starts racing, and when I hook into a big fish, I become completely blinkered and I just concentrate totally on everything that's happening at the end of the line. And when the perch came to the boat, I just shouted, "That's enormous, get the net," not realising that Dad was right next to me with the net in the water, and he just quickly scooped it up and it was in the net. I knew it would be pushing 4 pound. I was in a bit of shock. I knew that we'd just landed a very big perch, but bizarrely the fish didn't look as big in the net. So it wasn't until we actually lifted the perch out of the water that we realised how big this fish was. I normally use a stinger when I'm fishing for perch or zander, but this fish didn't need a stinger because it absolutely walloped the slick shad. And it wasn't the small size either, it was the 11 centimetre model, and it was just gone. So we quickly unhooked it, took a couple of quick pictures, then put it back in the water for a quick breather, and then came the moment of truth. It was time to weigh the fish. So we slipped it in the plastic bag, put it on the scales, and it quickly took the dial round to over 4 pound. It was hovering between 4.1 and 4 pound. We decided to settle on 4 pound on the final weight. And then quickly got it out of the plastic bag and straight onto the measuring mat, and it was 46.5 centimetres. And after getting the measurement, we put it back in the water and it swam off strongly. My dad and I had caught quite a few good perch over the few weeks leading up to that fish over 3 pound, but there's a difference between a 4 pound and a 3 pound perch, and this fish it looked significantly bigger. It was a fantastic looking fish, absolutely immaculate, and we were both in awe of it. It was an incredible fish, and it just goes to show how important it is to take opportunities when they arise. So you know, if you see a shoulder fish like that, it's always a good idea to do a quick drift over them, or have a few casts at least, because you never know what they could be. The rod that I use the most for targeting perch and zander on the reservoirs is the Terminator jigger. It's 7'1" and it casts 10 to 40 grams, so 3/8 of an ounce up to about 1.5 ounces really. It's quite a pokey rod, it's got a strong backbone, but it's also got a very sensitive tip, which is ideal because some of the bites that you get from perch and zander can sometimes be very delicate. This is coupled with a 2/500 size prism spinning reel, and that's spooled with 22 pound jig silk, which is 0.12 in diameter. What I like about the jigger is that it handles shads and other soft baits up to 5 or even 6 inches in size, but even when you hook into like a big perch, it's not too overkill, so that 4 pounder put up a great fight on this rod. I was fishing a 17 pound wire trace, as you never know when you could hook into a pike on these big reservoirs, even on fairly small lures, and clipped onto the end of that was a Fox Rage slick shad in 11 centimetres in the rough colour, rigged on a 1/2 ounce or 14 gram 3/0 jig head with a size 8 stinger. The slick shad has worked really well for us over the past few months on Grafham and other reservoirs, especially in the rough colour. To be honest, it's probably more down to the profile of the shad than the colour itself, because we have caught on other colours as well. And I think it's because the slick shad looks a lot like a baby zander, and perch, pike and zander in the reservoirs, they predate on small zander. In fact, in the past few weeks I've actually caught some really nice perch that have coughed up baby perch and zander in a similar kind of size range to the 11 centimetre slick shad. As the colder months have progressed, jigging seems to have been working better than a straight retrieve, and that 4 pound perch I caught the other day was caught jigging a slick shad along the bottom, just hopping it 6 inches or so off, letting it fall back down, leaving it for a second or two before repeating the process all the way back to the boat.